Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. Today, Ron and I are going to discuss our favorite dirty lessons from Ron's book, The Dirty Side of Leadership, Our Namesake. And Ron has a big announcement, so stay with us. And before we do that, we want to thank our listeners and viewers in the U.S. and abroad. We are honored to have you spend time with us each week. Please don't forget to like, rate, and share our podcast. Ron, give us that update.
All right. I'm going to do it with one eye.
I was supposed to mention last week's episode we filmed while Ron had a massive thunderstorm in the background. Now, our editor, our producer, Stephen, was able to get the majority of that sound out. Actually, I didn't hear it at all. Did you, Ron?
No, I think he got it out. But remember this too, Kristin, my daughter Haley, like so many trees fell on both sides. She was at a church, like a women's group, and they got stranded until she got out at midnight. It was
Those pictures
huge
were crazy.
Storm. It was a huge storm.
And it was towards the very end of us recording that episode, and we were joking around, come rain or shine, right? But now it's come rain, shine, or pink eye. Our friend Ron here has had the curse of pink eye show up, and here he is filming on camera. So thank you, Ron, for being so bold.
Yeah, let's just say I have a face for podcasts and not YouTube. Folks, do not leave the podcast and go to YouTube and look at me, please.
You know that's what's going to happen.
There's one other thing that happened. Kristin said, let's record on Wednesday. And I was so relieved. And so I was like, yeah, that's great. And guess what Kristin does? 5 minutes before, she goes, are we recording? I was like, what did I miss?
Well, I'm in New York next week, so we needed to record too. And I was like, wait, we could actually do the second episode next week. Poor Ron thought he was out of the loop until this pink eye.
Yeah, it's
goes
okay,
away.
Kristin. I'll read your mind next time, not your text. But anyway, hey, I really am excited. People that have listened to our podcast, they know that I'm a goal setter. I know Kristin is as well. And I have a vision board. It's literally right over my shoulder. And I have a small component on there of like long-term things. And since the end of 2021 or the middle of 2021, I had put book on Audible. It never happened because the idea is that I would read it myself. So I'm actually a podcast guest on a podcast with John Hewlin. And he mentioned that he reads books and puts them on Audible. And I cut a deal with him because this is a leadership lesson.
Right.
I don't think I would have ever made that happen. So I basically hired him to do it. And now it's on Audible. Not my voice. He has a better voice than mine anyway.
I doubt that, but I'm sure it's amazing.
I am very excited that now I had probably maybe 30% of the people that I promoted this book to say, if it ever comes on Audible, I'll buy it. Hint, hint.
Yeah.
So a lot of people do listen to books.
Yeah.
So I hope you will check it out. We will put the details in the show notes so that you will know exactly where to go. But basically, you go on Amazon. When you click or you type in The Dirty Side of Leadership, the book comes out right below the paperback. You can click on Audible and purchase it there. So very excited, Kristin.
I'm excited to listen to it because, as you know, I listen to, I'm not so much the book on, I almost said book on tape. You know, you 80'd your 80s yourself last week, and I pretty much just did that as well. But I listen to podcasts and I do prefer the audio versus having to read. I know that sounds really lazy, but I'm going to I did read your book, but I'm going to actually listen to it now. And I really think people that have read it should go and listen to it because you'll have that much more resonate with you. And what you described, Ron, with having, you had it on your vision board and you didn't record it, and that probably ate at you. My dad calls when he's at the point in his life where he's like, I call it the Roll-Aid factor, where he's going to hire somebody. He's like, yes, I could completely, do my whole yard myself, but I'm going to hire a landscaper to save on Rolaids, right? So it's the Rolaid factor. So I do think more and more people should really, yes, you could do it yourself, but is it going to kill you in the process, right? Are you going to be chewing on Rolaids every night? So I think that's great what you did.
And Kristin, we talked about being scrappy last week and getting volunteers, and you can also do a quid pro quo, but our Facebook administrator, Cassie Roop, she's been phenomenal in promoting our stuff. She actually has written several books that I didn't even know about.
I didn't know that either.
And you gotta look it up. And she uploaded, even though John Hewlin narrated, she uploaded this book for me, and I'm very grateful to her. We did an exchange. I provided her with executive coaching, and she's doing some of the promos for me and uploaded the book. But it was a challenge getting it uploaded, and she had to go back and redo some things. So when it finally, I got that email that says, "Congratulations, your book is uploaded." It was great for so many reasons. But thank you, Cassie. You were very instrumental in getting this done as well.
I have to say that trade of services is very entrepreneurial. And if we think back to, back in the day when we're just getting started, trade was everything, right? And even, Native Americans and early, people coming over from Europe and whatnot, they lived on trade. Like they did. So I think so many people, so many more people need to actually consider the trade of services. And it goes so far. So I think that's a wonderful point that you're making there. And I absolutely love that.
So Kristin, we have promoted my audiobook. I appreciate it. But I saw on social media, and we've had a big event last week that you were the moderator. How did that go?
Yeah, it was excellent. So basically it was the largest political candidate forum in the state of Washington. And so we had folks running for governor there. We had attorney general candidate, Washington State Supreme Court justice. He's currently a judge, but he's running to be on the Washington State Supreme Court. And we have Joe Kent, who anyone that watches Fox News or any conservative news channel is going to see Joe. He's just incredible. And so many more. We had 13 different candidates. And what I had done is I sit on the board for this organization that puts on large events in the Pacific Northwest. And it's a nonprofit. And I had compiled all of the questions for these candidates. And it was cool because I was able to go to each of their platforms and pull what they were running on, their issues, right? And so then I compiled questions based on their own platform. And they were complex. I'm talking 2- and 3-part questions. And they had an audience of 450 people that live in the area and live in Washington showed up to hear their answers, right? So it was seamless. It was exciting. The power in the room and just that energy was just electric. So it went very, very well. But I do have to say, if I wouldn't have prepped these questions and read through them and known, taken the time to know the candidates and what issues they're running on, it would not have been as good as it was.
Guys, I got to jump in here. I got to promote I give her a hard time, but if you do have an event, you need an MC. She's phenomenal. I listened to part of it. She had people laughing. I don't know how you do that when you're moderating a debate, but it was great. And Kristin is a great speaker. If you need presentations, executive coaching, but MCing seems to be what's growing more and more for you.
It's wild.
I mentioned last week Aces and Spaces. That might be your space to be the ace.
Yeah,
but reach out. I
had people come up to me that are very involved politically in the capital of Washington, Olympia, and telling me they'd like me to moderate their events for their nonprofits and whatever else they have going on. So that's huge. And I just have to say, the part that you're talking about, this was fun and this was not planned. Basically, I'm asking the gubernatorial candidate about his platform, and his platform is holding judges and prosecutors accountable, right, to enforcing the Washington State Constitution. And the funny thing is, as I'm reading this question to him, the judge is sitting like inches from me. And so I'm like, your platform is to hold judges. And I look over, I'm like, that's kind of awkward, right? And the entire room just and then prosecutors, I had a prosecutor right there too. So it was just really funny. And it's so great when that stuff can come together without it being planned out. But then also it really lightens that mood.
Yeah.
Because this is a very serious event, right? But we had 2 or 3 different times where the entire room was laughing. So
Absolutely. So
that's my
Kristin,
vision of success.
Yeah, that's
you
great.
can laugh.
Let me lay a quick foundation, and people may or may not be interested, so I'm going to keep this short. I set out to write a book because I was frustrated with a lot of books. I know that sounds arrogant, but I was. I felt like I could get the gist of it in 20 pages. So I wanted a more comprehensive book. As I started writing, believe it or not, I wrote the second half first, Kristin. I've never told you that. Most of the second half was finished, and I met with the publisher, and they said, hey, these people need to get to know you, and you have a unique story. So then I went back. That's when my childhood and all of that came into play. So I wrote the book kind of backwards. But I got this idea because I thought, why am I telling a story about growing up in the coal fields? That needs to be a novel, not a leadership book.
Right.
So then I got the idea of creating lessons. Like, I know everyone has this. You have something that happened in your childhood, and you realize later you learned a life lesson as a result. And my book was called The Dirty Side of Leadership. So I made them dirty lessons, which is humorous, but also, you remember that. And of course, I just use DL. I use the acronym DL. So there's 100 dirty lessons. So what Kristin and I have done is we just went in and picked some that we wanted to talk about. We call this the favorite lessons, but to be honest with you, it was really hard for me to pick favorites because they're all pretty passionate to me. And this was a passion project. I mentioned in the preface of the book, the night before I fired a federal agent, and I was sick at my stomach. I was so nervous. And I knew that all that training I'd taken just hadn't prepared me. And that's how the book starts. So anyway, Kristin.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's great. And you have a lesson to go with each of these lessons, like a story that goes with each of them. And that's what's so great, a real life story that you encountered. So let's get into the dirty lessons. Like you said, there's 100, and we're not going to go into all of them for time's sake. You can definitely get the book or listen on Audible to be able to capture all of that. So Ron, as you said, we chose a few, and we're going to alternate and share some stories that we've experienced that make these dirty lessons resonate for us.
I'll tell you what, Kristin, why don't you go first?
All right, I'll kick it off here. Okay, so this is dirty lesson number 12, staff your weaknesses. And Ron, as you always say, get a PhD in you, because you're not going to be able to staff your weaknesses unless you know what they are, right? And you're not going to know what they are unless you've done some introspection, like understanding yourself and where you're strong and where you lack. And so you don't want to be surrounded with those employees who are just like you. You're going to see some major gaps if you do that. And diversity brings strength. And, everyone hears diversity and you're thinking, right, different skin color, different background. We're talking about strengths here. And that's really what it should be about. So a diversity in strengths, what you're bringing to the table. And, a weakness that I experienced, Ron and I have been very forthcoming, right, with our lack of organization. And unless you know that about yourself and you're willing to admit it, you're going to keep that gap is just going to be there. And so for me, I always ensured that when I hired an assistant manager, because I was the manager for the majority of the time, I would hire an assistant who was very strong organizationally and liked that paperwork.
That's
right? And so if I didn't know that about myself and then be willing to admit it, there would have been a real problem there. And I'll completely admit to this. I once hired somebody that was like me, both more charismatic, big picture thinkers. And our first audit that we had wasn't so hot.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, my next staffing decision needs to be vastly different, right? They don't need to be this person that you see yourself in, right? So anyhow, that was a mistake I made, and I paid for it and then made changes.
Kristin, that's so big that I wish it was in the book. It is so natural to hire someone like you because, you think the same way, you feel the same way, and it makes you so comfortable. And yet they don't staff your weakness. They don't bring
Right.
anything to your weakness. And the easy way to think about this is if you have a computer problem, you're going to call IT. You're not going to call your best friend. So I think you added a great lesson there. And I knew this would happen as we progressed through these dirty lessons. Okay, the next one, let's see. I think that I'm going to do DL number 14.
All right.
Understand staff personalities and their possible journeys before you react too harshly. The more a manager understands his or her employees, the more effective he or she can be in coaching the individual. So, Kristin, you mentioned get a PhD in you. This is a statement I make in my trainings. Get a PhD in you and a master's degree in your staff. If you don't know your people, you can't coach your people. Right. When a coach is, let's use my favorite sport, basketball, you learn strengths and weaknesses. You learn who has the fundamentals, who goes right, who goes left, who can play defense. And then you begin to work on the weaknesses and you help them. And yet I've seen managers that are so aloof, they have no idea of their staff's weaknesses. They don't even probably know their own weakness, but they certainly don't know their staff's, and they can't coach them. But what I was really saying here, and we've talked a lot about childhood influences, and I'm doing a lot of executive coaching now, and it's very interesting when I bring this up in executive coaching, how people will say, oh my God, I absolutely am acting like my mother, and I didn't realize it. And I'm coaching someone right now, a CEO, who explained to me, and I thought this was really humorous, his dad was a complete militaristic manager by the book. His mother was a free spirit, more hippie-like, and just told him, his dad is constantly telling him, you go to college, you do this, you set goals, you do this. And his mother's saying, just have fun, son. Just enjoy life. Yeah. And he said, I swear there are days that my dad is speaking in my ear and I am driven, I'm doing all this stuff. He said, but there's also days that my mother's speaking in my ear and I don't give a crap. And he said, it's almost, he said, sometimes I feel schizophrenic. By the way, I'm sharing that by permission, although I'm not giving his name.
Nice, yeah.
But I told him, I said, I'm going to have to use that in the podcast because that's a great example of how childhood can influence you.
Oh, yeah.
But his was a little more extreme.
It's kind of like one on each shoulder, right? I don't want to say like the devil and the angel, but it's very different. And so you have on each shoulder these different, like, no, do this, no, do this. So yeah, I could see how that would drive you a bit nuts after a while. So I'm going to share dirty lesson 55, and that is effective leaders develop the skills necessary to thrive under pressure. And for public speaking, practice, 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 right? Even if you have to use the mirror or speak to a small group of friends and family, honestly, maybe even your dog or cat will listen to you. I mean, you have to just practice it. I just came off of a big public speaking event. I've already talked about that. But here, I think this may be interesting to some is my husband is a law enforcement officer who's deathly afraid of public speaking, right? Like literally he gets the shakes when he has to even talk at his brother's wedding. So the interesting piece of that is I respect his opinion so much. I read all of my questions to him that I was going to be asking these candidates, and I wanted his feedback and I valued his feedback, and I did make adjustments to some of the questions. One word I was pronouncing wrong. He coached me on that. So then I had to go in and adjust the way I had it typed out to make sure I would pronounce it properly. One question he thought was much too long and that the audience would glaze over, right? So I think it's things like that where if you take it seriously, and especially when you're going to have a large audience, you have to practice and you want to get that feedback. As uncomfortable as it may be, it's incredibly important that you do the things necessary to develop skills for you to thrive under pressure. Because I was just watching, this is a little interesting, it's off topic a little bit, but this just came out on Netflix, and it's the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, right? The DCC. And I like it because the process they go through to make the team is grueling. And so I just find that really interesting, that harsh pressure that they're under. And one of the gals got cut because she was a 20-year dancer, incredibly talented, but they said her face showed stress. Like you could see the pressure she was under on her face, and the audience would be distracted by this almost stressed pressure that you could just, you can just see it on somebody. And it just really resonated with me. Like there are so many things. You can be the creme de la creme, but if you are stressing out the people around you because they can tell how intense you are or how stressed you are, you're going to have a negative impact on them. So what are your thoughts on that, Ron, with the facial expressions that really tell a story?
Honestly, that's part. If you go back and look at my Instagram, there is a picture of a poster board with a cutout and someone's face sticking just above the poster board. And the section is called face management. And
Right.
as you know, one of our colleagues, Dr. Marissa Fiera, I called it facial expression. She called it face management. I like that better.
Yeah.
So, and we also do executive coaching on face management, and it's vital. Kristin, I had a terrible habit of putting my lips together, like when I play guitar.
You totally do that.
Yeah, and I've tried to work on it because I saw it on the podcast. For some reason, public speaking is different for me than when I'm doing this one-on-one thing. So Kristin knows me. I'm very hard on myself.
Right.
And so most of the time, if she sends me a text, did you get a chance to listen to the podcast or something? I'm never thrilled. Sometimes I send or whatever. So the last one, that scrappy, number one, I like the content.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been your mother suggested that, but I like the content, but also I felt I didn't do a lot of the things that I usually do. Now I'm squinting one eye, but it's for a reason. Kristin, tell us just quickly, because I want our listeners to hear this. You got caught off guard. See, I think if you build the foundation, these things will kick in automatically. So you got caught off guard when you were emceeing or moderating. Tell us about that. What'd you have to do?
And I thought I had it where I was going to work it into one of my dirty lesson choices. No, it's fine, because I'm looking down. I'm like, which one was I going to work that into? But I'm going to just jump into it now. But yeah, there was a moment where one of our panelists didn't show up. And that was one of the people running for political office, which very poor decision to not show up, especially a no-show, no call, no show, right, in the business world. Very poor decision. But we, as the moderators, because I rotated a few questions at one point with one of my friends, and we see that he's not coming up on stage, and we have this rotation of questions that the three of us were running through. And so I saw that it left me with 2 questions for the people that were up there, and it left my friend with 0. And so I immediately went over to her. I was like, you take this one, I will continue with this one. And to my friend to my left, you just run business as usual, right? And we did it so quick that nobody had any idea. But if we wouldn't have done that, it would have looked wonky, because I would have had 2, she would have had 0, and my counterpart would have had 2, right? And so you have to make these very quick decisions so that our audience of 450 and the panelists that did show up wouldn't have a negative experience.
Yeah, that's so important. I tell everyone, you're building a foundation now, and when you do have to operate on the fly, those basics will kick in. And that's what leadership training is about. I could go on and on, Kristin, so many times. We ran scenarios in the courtroom, and I'll be brief, but we had a judge got stuck in an airport, and he was supposed to play the part of a judge. And it's a real courtroom, real judge's robe, the whole thing. They called me, so I'm sitting in my office. 10 minutes later, I have jumped in my car, ran across campus, threw on the judge's robe because I'd done that role before. And next thing you know, I'm a judge in a scenario. You had to be that kind of ready. And in life, there's always going to be something where you're going to need to operate spare the moment, and you need to prepare yourself now. Don't panic. You can handle it, but jump in there and make something happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It's funny, Ron, you've had quite a bit of exposure to judges, right? And this was my first, and I was fangirling a little bit. And it was just because I know like the grueling process that you have to go through to get to that point, right? And especially for someone to remain in this position of power, but also have that level of humility that the one I interacted with has, right? And so it was funny. I don't know anything about that world at all. So I was just being a dork. This is actually embarrassing. I said, Oh, have you watched Your Honor? That's that. Michael Cranston plays a judge, right? And I'm like, that's the first, Kristin, that's the first thing you say. Oh my gosh, what a dork.
Bryan
Anyways.
Cranston, yes.
Yeah, or is it Bryan? Yeah, Bryan Cranston. Oh my gosh, from Breaking Bad. But he plays this judge that is gotten to, and it's just so good.
I just started that, by the way. So don't do a spoiler.
I won't spoil it, but it's like literally after Breaking Bad, like one of my favorites that I've ever watched. So, but yeah, I just so my lack of exposure to that level of person, it showed through. But he got a kick out of it. It looked like.
I get it, Kristin. The first time I went into federal court, I was mesmerized, and this was a magistrate judge, but I looked down on the report. This is a lesson, by the way, free, bonus, not in the book.
Bonus lesson.
I looked down, and they were arguing. You had to put in the pretrial report, we made a bail recommendation as a part of U.S. pretrial services. So if someone gets arrested, we interview them. We go down to Marshall lockup. We're the first on the scene. That's part of our job. That was fast. You had to do background check, everything you could gather. So in my report, it says the defendant does not appear to pose a threat to public safety. You address two things, safety and flight risk. Do you think they might flee? Anyway, I'm sitting there. It's a proud moment. They're literally using my report, my first one. They're discussing it. I look down. I kid you not. It says the defendant does not appear to pose a threat to society. It did not say threat. So proofread your work.
Yes.
Fast forward 15 years, and I'm doing a presentation to the Criminal Law Committee, which is made up of chief federal judges all across the country. So you stick in there, but I get it, Kristin. I get the way you felt that way. And I do remember being a little nervous, but it's like everything. The more familiar you are, you know, I dealt with judges my whole career, so I was not that nervous to do this presentation, but I was also very prepared.
Right.
And that's, you know, that's a free lesson there. All right, this next one, I think you're going to enjoy this, Kristin. And sometimes because I did my fundamentals of leadership also cover the 100 dirty lessons, but I used different stories and had 20 different contributors, whereas the book has its own set of stories. So sometimes I get a little mixed up. But this is in one of them, either in the book or it's in the leadership course. But this is at DL26. And by the way, we're not going in a particular order. So if you're analytical and you're counting and thinking something's wrong with us.
If you're analytical, you're going nuts right now.
Yeah, right.
Just
so this is DL26. Effective managers don't jump to conclusions without sufficient information. And I used a humorous story, but I will tell you this. When people are emotional, they will jump to conclusions, and you have to be careful to guard your emotions in business, especially. I always say this, emotional people will exaggerate. You never listen to me. You always do this. So your emotions wants to take you to some place, some conclusion that may or may not be based in fact. So it's very important to keep those emotions under control. So this happened to me once. I had torn my knee in martial arts. Typical me, I did not rehab properly. I went back 2 weeks before I was released by the doctor. Sure enough, I go in there and tear the meniscus again, and my knee's locked. It won't even straighten up. I had eaten breakfast that morning. So when they go to by the way, I didn't even tell my parents. I got a ride from somebody from college because I'm a couple hours away from them, 3 hours maybe. And I just didn't like my mom to worry. What I didn't realize is they get a bill for those surgeries. So anyway, that came out later. I go to surgery and I'm laying on the table. They do a spinal tap or spinal block.
Yeah.
Because I had eaten. They couldn't put me to sleep. So I'm laying there and all of a sudden my legs go numb. And to this day, Kristin, it still impacts me when I see people in a wheelchair. It breaks my heart because it was so difficult
traumatic
for me.
Yes.
So I'm laying there and there's this cute nurse. I'm probably, 22 years old. I'm talking to her, looking at her, and they have raised my leg to put a constricting band. It's the knee they're going to do surgery on. I think my legs are on the table. So I look over, I kid you not, when I see my leg, I said, my God, they've amputated my leg. This all happened in a split second. True story. Yeah. I push the nurse completely over the operating tools. I'm trying to grab the doctor, like I'm going to kill him. It's a scene out of a movie. They jump on me. There's people, an orderly, they're holding me down, and I can see them putting something, I guess it was Valium in the IV.
Oh, no.
But I had never completely freaked to that extent. Now, I'm sure they had me so sedated, but I think they had to get all new operating stuff.
Oh, no.
Because I heard this huge calamity when I pushed her.
Landed on the floor.
So I freaked out. Now, that's extreme, but ask yourself a question when you get in that crisis, don't allow your emotions to take control. So ask yourself, am I being emotional or am I being logical? Because there's always going to be times, there's opportunities to panic. Don't panic.
Right. Oh my gosh. I could totally see that. And I had an emergency C-section with my second. So they had to do the same thing. They had to do the spinal. And yeah, that feeling of no control of anything is, that's intense. And so I can see why you felt that way. You don't know what's up or down or up. And
it's weird.
That's wild.
God bless
and
those
I do
people
think,
that have to go through that.
Oh my gosh, I know. Seriously. There is something when you say the jump to conclusions, and I won't go too deep into this, but there are, I would say there's a difference in even genders, right? I would say that women run more emotional for just scientific reasons, and men can be more level-headed. Now, that's not across the board, but when you look at history and women not being able to vote and hold these positions, it is interesting the thought process that went into that. And again, it's not across the board, but I do think that needs to be factored in. Some people, not just women, but some people do not have that ability to pause and think about the scenario before jumping to conclusions. And so generally, if you're like that, if you're a hair on fire, I've had hair on fire leaders before, and that's bad. That's that jump to conclusions, and it stresses everyone out around them unnecessarily. So, and I want to tell, there's a story that goes along with that. I know this is your choice, Ron, but I just can't help myself to jump in on DL26. But one of the banks, I won't go into the details on which one, but one of the banks I worked at had what they called a president's phone, which I think conceptually it's amazing. It's like in every branch, a customer ideally can pick up the phone and it goes to the office of the president, the CEO, right? But that's, the reality of it is a CEO is doing a lot of things running a bank. And so they're not going to be on the other end of that. So there's a team that manages these incoming calls. But something that I don't think was necessarily considered is the person that actually goes, you have a managerial staff in the branch that are there to solve your problems, right? The person that goes and just picks up that phone and says, I'm going to call the CEO, they're generally already at level 8, 9, 10, right? And so they're going to skip hierarchy and just go to the phone. And then they call through to the president's office, and then it's just hair on fire, ran up the line, right? Even though the mentality of the person might not be, they might not all be there, right? Clearly, they're not willing to work with the leadership team. They just want to just go right to the top. So anyhow, what it did is it caused this, and I got a lot of feedback on this, it caused this hair on fire throughout the entire organization. And it was a very unpleasant experience for many. And so I think that's like the epitome of why we don't want to just jump because you're being told to, right? Don't just jump to conclusions without that significant or sufficient information. What do you think about that conceptually, like a president's phone?
Well, number one, I'm stunned. I didn't know that. I would have called multiple times just to say hello. You should have told me that. What's up? I like it. I like the concept that the president's reachable, but I can totally see where someone's already over in their feels, as Gen Z says, and they jump on that phone. So I don't know. I'm glad there was not a straight phone to my office. That's for sure.
Right. I know. I used to say we are catering to the mentally unstable. Seriously. But that wasn't a crowd favorite that I pointed that one out.
Yeah.
Okay. So DL69, Al- always pursue shared agreements. And basically, for those that are unfamiliar with that, and Ron, if you could, I mean, we can have you talk about shared agreements after I go into this, but it's basically getting buy-in. That buy-in is so crucial. So you're going to get that buy-in from staff and then provide staff with clear expectations. Then expect the best and prepare for the worst. So there's multiple factors in there. But what I like about this, and I know these are your DLs, Ron. So what I like about 69 in particular is that, there were so many times that I didn't have clear expectations given to me, right? And that's especially tough when you don't have, like, in the branches, you always have a sales goal, operations goal, right? You have all these goals and you're looking every single day to see where you land, right? So that's pretty easy to manage. Now, when you're in a department that is more like production but that doesn't have these numbers for you to reflect on, that makes it more difficult. So it makes it more important that leadership tells you exactly what they expect of you. And then if it's, I expect you to have great communication. Okay, great. What does that mean to you? Do you want your emails responded to within 2 hours? Do you want me to have a conference call with my staff twice weekly, right? Like, what is good communication to you? Because it's vastly different. Believe me, leader to leader, it's different. And so I think that is critical, because I have had it to where this is early in my leadership career, but early on, I remember a manager was like, I'm going to give you just a meets expectations in communication. And I'm used to an exceeds expectations. So I'm like, what can I do better? Well, I would like for you to, just call me at least once a week to talk about things and let me know how your staff's doing. Well, these were not things that I knew. I've always been the person to leave my manager alone and only involve them if there's something that I'm unable to handle.
Right.
Not the touchy-feely stuff, right? Or the, like warm and fuzzy, let's talk about things. I just didn't know that that's what was expected of me. So therefore, it didn't happen. So those types of things are really important. If you expect something, let your staff know. Otherwise, they can't read your mind.
Yeah, that's all very true. The simple way of shared agreements is, I used to do this. Like, you could say, I need to meet with you every day at 11 o'clock. That's a directive.
Mm-hmm.
But if I said, hey, what do you think, if someone needed this, and I'm just using an example, what do you think if we were to meet and discuss this every day next week? It's so important. Then the employee says, yeah, that would be great. You say, how about 11 o'clock? They say, yeah, that works for me. You just had a shared agreement.
Right.
Whereas me going, hey, we're going to meet every day at 11 o'clock. So you get buy-in from your employees if you get a shared agreement out of them. I want to
ask your opinion on one thing, because when I think of that, and here's why I love the shared agreement or this buy-in so much, because if my manager was coming to me and saying, because again, like let's say upper management to mid-level manager, right? I want to meet every day at 11. I would have said, I would say meeting daily might be overkill. How about every other day, right? Like and the beautiful thing about buy-in is it does give you that opportunity to respectfully share your opinion. But what are your thoughts on that as someone who is, like executive leadership? What is your feedback on if somebody does think they're being asked if daily works for them, but what if they truly feel that that's a little bit overkill? Do you empower them to share that?
As much as you can. Yes, absolutely. The example I use, I would never meet with someone every day unless we were in some kind of crisis situation. Yeah. It was usually the opposite for me. I had people wanting to meet every day, and I'm going, hey, could we make that every other day?
Yeah.
But yes, have some room for negotiation, because if they feel a win or they feel you're listening, that just bolsters their buy-in.
Right.
So if you go in with a preconceived idea and you're really not negotiating at all, don't pretend to be. If it's a directive, make it a directive.
Right.
But if it's
I
not,
love that.
let them have some buy-in.
I love that.
Negotiation.
Excellent.
Okay. So like I said, there's so many of these but this, Kristin, out of everything in my whole book, this is the number one question I have. And when I traveled, a couple of people told me, I'm glad you put this in the book. The chapter is called A Friend Today, Boss Tomorrow. And
Yes.
so many times, and I know you experience this in the banking industry, you might go up against one of your colleagues and you get promoted and they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was pretty major because I went from section chief to academy director. And when we started the academy, it was about 10 of us moved here. So we were all friends. We stayed in the same hotel. So it was really awkward. So I tried to provide guidance because I did this. I tried to come across humble in my first meeting, like, I'm going to need your all's help and all that. They didn't need that. They didn't need that
Right.
false humility. They needed a leader. And I had to
Mm.
realize that quickly. And that's why I wrote
Yeah.
my book, is so other people won't have the pitfalls that I
Yeah.
had. But the dirty lesson is, as a new leader, it's number 54, as a new leader, there's no grace period. Start establishing contacts, set your priorities, and don't get overwhelmed. You've got this. Ask questions and make decisions. One of the things that I tell new leaders is your body language, which we've done 2 full episodes on, your face management that we mentioned. Look people in the eye and ask questions. By you asking questions, it is showing your authority, but your interest. So if I said, Kristin, why do you have your employees doing this? That doesn't mean that I'm going to try to rip you apart, but
Right.
by me questioning you, I am taking a position of authority. Now, I had this somewhat fall in my lap, but I had someone come to me. They wanted to make a purchase that the previous academy director had promised, or basically said, we might be able to purchase this under the new budget
Right.
cycle. Now, whether that happened or not, I don't know. But this was a friend. This was someone that I'd come up through the ranks with. So I basically asked very serious questions, and it was a situation. It was gray whether were allowed to purchase that. So I ended up denying the purchase. Now, that was difficult, and this person pouted and strained our friendship, but it certainly established me as the leader.
Right.
And also that I was not going to operate in this gray area and get in trouble over the budget.
Yeah.
So there's things that you do, the way you carry yourself, the way you respond. You got to make decisions. It's okay to collaborate, but you do have to make decisions. But right out of the gate, don't use false humility. Come out, put your shoulders back. Don't be arrogant, but be a leader. Be the leader they need.
I have a question for you, because I know this comes up a lot, and it did in my career. When a new leader comes in, because I completely understand what you're saying here. I've had it to where a new leader came in and started making changes in week 1. And I personally felt, at least in these scenarios, that they needed to, yes, establish yourself as a leader, but understand what's going on before you start tearing it apart. And a lot of times we ended up going back to the way it was. It was like they were flexing to flex, but it ended up blowing up numerous times. What advice do you have for the new leader that thinks that that's the way to flex?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think we should probably do a podcast on what's your flex.
Yes.
I love that question, but it's broad, because if a new leader comes out of a tragic situation or something that was causing the company to go under, you got to make drastic decisions, drastic changes.
Right.
But if you come into a normal situation, the last thing you want to do is just go in and rock the boat just to be rocking.
Yeah.
So like you said, Kristin, they need to go to all levels of employees, make sure that change is necessary, and then you try to get, going back to the other one, try to get shared agreements, try to get buy-in, go to the manager and go, I'm thinking about changing this. What's your thoughts? And some things are about timing. Maybe you're going to change it, but maybe it can wait a few months so that you don't totally look like you're turning the agency upside down. So a lot of that is being intuitive and getting the right information, but that's the best way I can answer that, because it depends on the situation.
It really does. And I respect that a lot, actually. No, I think that's great. Thanks for sharing that with us here.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go with DL. I've shortened it to DL now. I'm copying you. DL 44, never have too much pride to learn from your colleagues. And a particular subject matter expert, we called him SME, or a thought leader may be in your company or already on your team. And I believe I've shared this before. It was very important for me to always have someone on my team that was very tech savvy. Not that I'm an imbecile or inept, but I'm talking like someone that could hack if they needed to, right? I wanted someone at that hacker level that just knew how to do everything. So that was that subject matter expert. And believe me, they came in handy. And I always made sure I was equipped with someone that had that mind. And so for me, and again, that just goes back to not being prideful, understanding, I know my way around tech, but I'm not the creme de la creme, and I need someone who is, and bring them in and prop them up. Man, you are our SME. This is you. You're awesome. Anyone that needs you, offer them out to other departments that have something going on that they can't solve. Your SME gets to go over there and feel like the king, or queen. It's awesome. So that's been my experience.
That I love that. That's so important. And like you said, if you can share a subject matter expert with someone, that bolsters their own. It gives them extra buy-in. It gives them a favorable look at you. They know that you're a team player. You're looking at the overall organization, or even helping another organization. It's always good to do that. And I used to send our instructors sometimes, if we had a particular district that could not send their people to the academy, or maybe it's a large district like California or Texas, I would send export programs so that I'd send 2 instructors to put on a certification. So it would help them. So it helped everybody. And the people that got to go do it, they loved it, and the recipients loved it. So that's great, Kristin. So based on time, I don't know, I'd love to do 2 episodes on this because we got so many things that we could go into. You think it'd be cool if I end on a really negative note?
Lana, we're going to end on a low note here.
Hang on. If you're driving, hang on. But here's the point. If you are a manager, this is going to be such a high note for you. And I had some people, the book's called The Dirty Side of Leadership. So there are some actual dirty lessons. And this one, I was honored because in my leadership course, the executive producer of Walker, Texas Ranger, and the A-Team, several shows, he and I became friends. We did a joint book signing. So I gave people a choice, 1 out of 5 dirty lessons, because I didn't want someone to pick the same ones. So you would get a group of 5 lessons that you could pick from. And he chose this one. And we could not say this in the leadership program, but let's just say he had to terminate the star of one of those shows. He had to terminate his best friend because he was an alcoholic and he was causing a problem on set. Now, I could never go into who the star was, but did I ever tell you, Kristin, I took martial arts a lot?
Yes. Did he fire you, Ron?
Maybe somebody else that did a lot of martial arts on TV.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, he didn't want to go as far as to mention a name, so I won't. But
that's good.
He's a legend. So here it is.
Moving on.
This is probably probably the strictest dirty lesson in here. Straightforward.
Okay.
DL 83. There's only one tribe. Either join or leave. As your organization grows, so will the derelicts. Deal with it. Boom.
Wow. Yeah, that is.
I was surprised that he chose that one, but he'd went through that situation on a TV show, and he chose that. But what I wanted to do, Kristin, on this one is, and since we're coming to a conclusion, I'm going to read just a little bit, but I'm going to summarize and read. So the first part of that chapter, I talk about Absalom. Absalom was King David's son, most popular son. The Bible described him as having long hair. He was like good looking. He was the stud of the kingdom. So he wanted the kingdom. He began to undermine his dad. So what would happen is people would go in for judgment, and David would pass judgment. He would hide down the road. And we've all seen these kind of people in every organization. And he would go, if I were king, this is how I would have handled it. And he began to brown nose the people. And sure enough, it worked. He was so good looking and popular that people forgot about David's conquest, that he killed a giant, did all of that. It says that he won the hearts of the people. So they started thinking, we want this young, cool guy leading us, not the old king. And the way this ended was there became a civil war. And David and Joab Joab was the warrior for David. And it turns out there's this war breaks out, and Absalom is on the run, and he's running, and his horse goes under a tree and he grabs it. He's literally hanging from a tree branch, and Joab comes up on him. You don't want to be hanging from a tree when a warrior like Joab comes up.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Joab looks at him, and he does what he thinks he's supposed to do. He puts 3, it says darts, spears through his heart, through his side, and he falls to the ground, and he's dead. There's another great story I won't go into, but I use it in some of my leadership training when the message was delivered to David. It's a great story, Kristin. Remind me to tell you sometime.
Yeah.
But David gets word that his son has been killed. And instead of being happy that he's got the kingdom back, he's very sad because that was his son.
Yeah.
So it's a great story. This is the point I wanted to make. There is only one tribe. You join or leave. But a good manager hurts when people undermine that manager. It hurts. Managers are human beings. And some of the people that I've had to get rid of, it was a relief. But when they first started doing it, it hurt deeply because you never like to think of people that way. So what I wanted to read just a little bit, and I put dealing with the Absaloms in your company is painful. If you're a compassionate leader, every agency, business, organization, and religious organization always has that one person who thinks that they know more than the executive managers or even their middle managers. And if you don't have one now, you're going to have one eventually. I have had people naively think that's never going to happen to them, and then it does.
Right.
These employees are often insecure, project an image of superiority. They're usually talented, but they have no concept of what it means to be a team player. They want to make themselves look good, and it's really at the demise of other people.
Right.
A key to great leadership, and this is a dirty lesson, is you have to find out. You have to realize this person has gone to the dark side, and I call the dark side. They're not coming back, and they're going to recruit other people, and they're going to continue to erode the agency. That's when you have to step in. And what I mentioned in the book is the problem is these people operate in the fringes. They do little things to undermine you, so you have to do what Kristin and I both hate. You have to micromanage. You have to keep your ear to the ground with these people and wait for them to misstep. And they will misstep eventually. Then you have to have the courage. And by the way, I would go ahead and notify my superiors, which I've done before, that I think this is going to happen. So I need to know if you're going to support me. You may want to contact HR and say, I know this is happening. Are you going to support me? That's what I did in a situation. But ultimately, on multiple times, I had to deal with it. And I'm telling you, the other people involved, it's going to go quiet for a few days, but they're going to respect you because almost always they know what this person did. They know they're a bully. They know they went to the dark side. And if you do nothing, not only is that person going to try to form their own little fiefdom, you are going to look weak to the other employees. So it's so important. I'm going to read it one more time because it is, this is so vital that
we're going to need to do a whole episode on termination.
I think we should. But anyway, DL 83, there's only one tribe. Either join or leave. As your organization grows, so will the derelicts. Deal with it. And if you are that derelict, you are that person, I know it feels right, and you may even be right. By the way, executives aren't always right. But there's a greater principle in not trying to erode the organization or trying to build your own fiefdom. That's where insecurity and immaturity kicks in. I've seen plenty of times where CEOs make the wrong decision. That does not give you the right to undermine them and create all this chaos in the organization. That's the difference. Because I had someone tell me once that I was naive because I did a presentation on that, what we just talked about. And they're like, don't you understand sometimes there's horrible leaders? I said, oh, yeah, I get that. I get that totally. But when I explain that, they go, well, I guess that's true. I guess that's
Yeah,
true.
there's a right and a wrong way to address it. I had and again, I'm going to tell this story in better detail when we do an episode on termination and just how to spot someone that's gone to the dark side. We just need to, expand that whole thing out because that would be great. But I had a Slavic business partner that came into the bank twice a week or so. And so he had a pretty good understanding of my team. And this is earlier in my leadership career. And he was telling me his observations because he had been doing it for 30 years. He was telling me his observations about one of my employees. And he said, he has a very thick, I don't know if he was Russian, Ukrainian, but a thick Slavic accent. And I'm going to slaughter it. But he was like, you need to cut them out like the cancer they are. Basically, and he was explaining it, and his wife is actually a doctor. So, but anyways, he was explaining it like they are going to spread. If that negativity in that person is going to spread to your entire team, if you don't cut that cancer out of the equation. And that really resonated with me. And here I am all these years later, and it's so true. And I made the mistake of keeping people longer than I should have, right? You believe in them or you think that they're going to be able to come back. But the truth is, generally, your instinct is spot on. And if you think they've gone over to the dark side and they're very negative and they're spreading that negativity within the team, you have to cut that out.
And with the government, it's so difficult. So you really are like,
yeah.
oh my God, do I want to go down this road? And of course,
and it
courage.
Shouldn't be that way.
No, it
right?
shouldn't.
That's the thing with tenure and all of that, unions. Gosh, if people if it's so different in the private sector. You can, it's all based on how you perform. But yeah, it's totally different. But I think we should do a whole episode where we talk about it from two different standpoints, right? So yeah, I think that's fantastic. That's a great dirty lesson.
So just to add to that lesson, I said the most popular one that I got feedback on was friend today, boss tomorrow. But from executives, this is the lesson that they were like, oh my God, I can't believe you put that in there. No one says that.
Right.
When they go the dark side, they don't come back. Like they know it. So younger managers need to talk to experienced managers and they will see that this lesson is absolutely applicable. If
true.
Not now, it will be. So
I've made the mistake of thinking they could come back and they just can't.
Yeah, it's true. Kristin, thank you for doing. I wanted to jump back in on these dirty lessons. When I mentioned Kristin, she was all about it. Yeah. And I do think these are lessons that if newer managers would read all of these, and they're in the back of the book as well, that it could help them so much. Maybe you pick the ones you want and go and read that particular story that aligns, because I tried to use real stories as much as I could. I had to worry about lawsuits, so there's some name changes and a few little circumstances, but most everything in that book is true. Right. And either something someone else dealt with and told me about, or most of it was stuff that I've actually dealt with. And I felt that was missing in other books as well. Not all of them, but a lot of the books. Right. Also, we would love to hear, what's your favorite dirty lesson? I always love when people tell me something in the book that they liked. I had someone tell me not long ago, Kristin, it's just a funny story in there. There's a story called Casket in the Living Room. And I've probably gotten more people respond because they laughed a lot on that one. And you've probably never heard of this, Kristin, but in the Appalachian Mountains, they used to bring the body home and for the wake, like right in the living room, the casket sitting in the living room. So it was a great story about that. The book does have humor, tragedy.
That's what nightmares are made of.
Yeah, it's what nightmares are made of. But yeah, it's a novel. It's a leadership novel is what I like to say to people, because I didn't want you to get bored reading it. And I hope, at least to a lot of people, I succeeded. So.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm excited to listen to it. As I said earlier, I read through it. Now I need to listen to it. So it'll really be ingrained. All right.
Well, everyone, thanks so much for listening. Believe it or not, Kristin, it's starting to thunder and rain again in South Carolina.
So better you than me.
We better sign off.
Thunder and pink eye.
That's right. Be the
Signing
leader.
off.
Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.